Well, welcome to Collaborate Worship, where we help you create great sound at church. I'm your host, Cade Young, and today I'm here with Nathan Drake. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. And for those of you who don't know Nathan, he's the creator of two incredible resources. The first is called Reawaken Hymns, and that's where he helps you bring new life to what you might think are old and dusty hymns. And he also has a YouTube channel called Mina Studio, where he helps you with the tech side of worship. And speaking of church tech, I'd like to talk to you today about mixing vocals for a live stream. So you ready for that?
I'm so excited.
All right, man. Well, let's just jump in. I know that EQ will vary depending on the vocal, but what are your go-to EQ filters for almost every vocal in a live stream mix?
For sure, yeah. It is a hard question because, vocals are like the most varied instrument in your band. Like no two will sound the same at all. One thing you should probably always do with vocals is a low cut. Probably 80 to 100 hertz is where I would usually go. You don't need anything below that for vocals. And if you do, then you're very white, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, definitely, because that'll just mud up your mix as if you have all those low frequencies coming from the vocals, especially if you have like, a huge backing vocal thing and you have like 20 mics up there and all of them are getting these low rumbles from hundreds. Because if you're in a live situation, your mics are probably picking up other things, and there's nothing under 100 for vocals. So you've just got 20 mics picking up the rumble of like the bass and stuff, and they don't need to be there. So every vocal, I would definitely do a low cut for sure. And then the only other things I would say that are like consistent across the board is you want your vocals to cut through the mix. Obviously, you want your lead vocal to be the lead vocal. It should be the most audible thing in your mix. And I would tend to boost in the like 1,000 to 2,000 range. So you have like a bit of clarity in that like 1,000 to 2,000 hertz range. And then in the 3,000 to 4,000 range, you have kind of that crispness. Those two places can both really help with the clarity of the vocals. Some people might see like that the fundamentals of vocals are in the like hundreds to 400 hertz and want to boost that. But you don't want to boost that because it's the fundamental. That will be the loudest thing in the vocals, and that's fine. But if you boost that, you're just going to get the boominess. It's just going to sound like this because that's the fundamental. So if you want clarity and you want it to cut through, I would boost in the 1,000 to 2,000 range, and also possibly in the 3K range. But 3K is also the hurt your ears range of the frequency spectrum, so be very careful in 3K.
Yeah, man, that's good stuff. On the low cut filter, I tend to be a little more aggressive and cut somewhere between 120 and I'll even go up to 180 hertz sometimes. It's okay if we disagree on this. I'm just curious, like, do you oppose being that aggressive with it, or what do you think?
I don't. I could tell you that some of my fundamentals when I sing will be below that 180. If I go at the very low spectrum, because I also have a boomy voice, but I mean, you might say, "Hey, dude, your voice is too boomy. I gotta get rid of that," and that's fine. I totally get that for sure. Yeah, you can be much more aggressive with low cut for vocals than for like a bass guitar or something, because you're not really going to interfere with anything that anyone's going to notice. It's just going to cut mud.
Yep, good stuff. So when it comes to like the room mix versus the live stream mix, I mean, we're basically talking about live sound versus recorded sound, which whenever we talked about doing this interview, you're like, I want to talk about, recording sound because you just got through recording an album. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that real quick?
Sure. Yeah, I'm deep in the recording tech stuff right now. So I just finished... I just released Hymns of the Father, which is a 20-song modern hymn album. So I finished recording that like 3 months ago or so. And it was 20 songs. It was all me recording, doing all the instruments and all that. And I usually do acoustic-y stuff, and I wanted to kind of get stuff for the people who have full modern worship bands. So this has full bands. It's got synths. It's got electric guitars. It's got bass. It's got drums. It's got everything. And so since I played them all and I recorded them all, I had to learn how to mix them all. And I had a little, I had an idea from doing live church sound, but when you start recording these things, you got to get like deep. So I'm like nerding out on compressor settings for 3 hours, trying to figure out how to compress like the third electric guitar on the thing. And I love it. I absolutely love it. Absolutely loved it. So that's what I've been doing is I've been in the studio for like 6 months straight recording and mixing that album. So it's good to see daylight again.
I bet so. And man, whenever you're talking about, mixing for a recording, that's the same thing as mixing for a live stream, because you're mixing for somebody that's going to be playing this over, well, honestly, most people are going to be playing it over their phone speakers, which is a bummer. But some people will have, nicer speakers that they're playing it with. But you just talked about, compression. And when it comes to a room mix, you can get away with less compression on vocals because, the extra dynamic range will kind of be swallowed up by the room and you may not notice it as much. But when it comes to a live stream mix or a recorded mix, you have to be a lot more aggressive with compression in order to get a good mix. So what did you learn about compressing vocals in your journey?
Mainly I learned that no one has the same opinion on how to do it. But these these world-renowned mix engineers will say the opposite things on how to compress vocals. So that tells you that you got to listen to it. Like that's really the only way. I feel like I'll give you my opinions here, who is not a professional mix engineer, by the way, but I've been doing it a lot recently. So I feel like you can compress vocals quite a bit harder than you can compress a lot of other instruments, simply because of the nature of the voice as an instrument. It is already very dynamic and very unstable, which other instruments are. Like if you play a guitar string, it's a note and it's kind of a consistent curve of volume. If you sing a note, you never know what that person's gonna. It might be a consistent curve. It might be in and out. It might be it's already such a varied and unstable instrument that I think you can compress it a bit more because people don't really notice that difference in volume because it's a natural difference in volume anyway. If you have the ability to, which a lot of people might not, but if you're mixing your live stream in a DAW, you can. I like to stage my compression and do gradual compression. So on all my vocal chains on my recording, there's 3 or 4 compressors, like compressor EQ, compressor EQ, compressor EQ. And I just like doing that because you can compress a lot, but it's more subtle because that one compressor isn't trying to bump it down by a ratio 4-to-1. You got 4 ratios of 1.5-to-1, and this one brings it down a little, and the next one does, and the next one does. And it's a much more gentle way to do compression. So if you can stage compression, that's a good way to do it. I know 1, you might not be able to, and 2, that's just a lot of work to adjust for compressors. So if you're going with a single compressor, I would do I'm probably a little more upfront with the compression than some people might recommend. So be aware of that when I say these settings, but I would probably go 3-to-1 ratio, maybe up to 4-to-1 for the lead vocal, just because you want to keep it consistent on the live stream. I find that attack and release with vocals isn't as important with other instruments. Like a bass drum, you got to be super careful about the attack because that's what all a bass drum does is attack. But vocals, again, the attack of a vocal isn't usually an attack. It's usually even if you can't hear the build up, we just have to build up to a note because we have to breathe, So attack and release, not as important. I usually go with a 20 millisecond, between 10 and 30 millisecond attack. Some people go low, some people go high. Release, I go pretty long, a 80 or higher. The biggest thing with vocals is the threshold. That's usually the biggest thing with any compressor, that's not something that you can say, do this threshold, because that is completely dependent on the level of your track, because that's the speed limit of your compressor. That's the point where it says, hey, we've gotten this fast, turn it down. Or we've gotten this loud, turn it down. So that you literally have to do with the vocalist at the time while you're mixing. You can't guess, because I could set my threshold to -20 and this vocalist would never hit that, and this vocalist would be squashed to, all heck, because they're wildly different volumes. So threshold you need to set with the vocalist, during the mix, you need to adjust it and make sure that you're not putting 10 dBs of reduction on it if you're not intending to, or the opposite. So that's probably my live stream settings.
Yeah, so when you're adjusting that threshold, you're looking at the gain reduction meter, to figure out where you're at. So what are you looking at on the gain reduction meter? How much are you trying to push that vocal down?
If it's a single compressor and it's a pretty loud mix, you're mixing an Elevation song or something, you can go 5, 6, 10. 10's probably pushing it. And you're probably going to start hearing a little squashiness, which you might want. I don't know. But I think 5 is fine for a vocal if it doesn't sound too squashed. That's the biggest thing. If you can hear the compressor, it's probably too far, because at that point it's sounding like waviness and grittiness and nastiness. So, but yeah.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. My threshold is like gain reduction at -6, and like that's as far as I'm going to go. Especially a lot of churches are using the Behringer X32, and that's mid-range quality equipment. So you start compressing more than 60 dB, and you're really going to hear it. I always it kind of sounds like you're sticking a hand in front of their face, or it just the vocal sounds smashed. It starts to lose its life. I mean, it starts to lose its presence, and yeah, maybe with a higher quality compressor, you can get away compressing more than that. I don't know. I've never got my hands on one, but
yeah. And there's some of these software compressors now are just really good. Like even the cheaper ones, like one I use is from Klangham. They're a plug-in manufacturer, and it's like a $30 compressor, but it's I think it's a L2. What is that compressor? L2A2? L2-2A. L2-2A is the compressor it emulates, and it's an amazing plugin for like $30. And I could squash the heck out of stuff with that, and I don't hear it, but that, like the built-in Behringer compressor, you're gonna have to be careful with that.
Well, man, you got me thinking about staging compression, or I guess you could kind of call that layering compression, right? To help people understand that. One compressor on top of the other. I wonder if on the say you're mixing on the X32, your live stream and your room mix, if you can maybe subgroup your vocals into one of the buses and put another compressor there, like have a compressor on each individual vocal, and then send those all to a bus and then compress them again. Have you ever heard of anybody doing that?
I'm not sure about a live stream setting. In recording, like I don't tell anybody, but I have like a compressor on every bus. It's like the vocals go to a mixed bus without a compressor, which goes to a instrument bus without a compressor, which goes to the mixed bus which has a compressor. But I think it's trickier to do in a like a Behringer. I don't see why that wouldn't work though, because you're doing the same thing. I mean, you're compressing each individually, and then the bus is compressing it. So as far as the sound quality, I think that would be the same as adding 2 compressors on the same thing. You'd have to try that. I've not heard that though.
Yeah, I'm just spitting out ideas. Just something I thought of. I'm going to have to go try it and see how it goes.
Let me know how that goes.
Yeah, man. It's something I learned. I didn't mix a live stream until COVID hit last year. We didn't live stream our service, and so I just never had a reason to jump into it. And man, what I found out is that everything needed compression, because there were certain things in the room mix we just didn't compress. Because my whole theory was, if it doesn't need it, then don't use it. I'm kind of a simple guy, so Yeah. And then you hear that in the live stream mix, you're like, wow, there's way too much dynamic range in this mix. So compression is just something that you really have to pay attention to if you want a great live stream mix, or if you want a great recorded mix. So thank you for sharing these tips. And let me know if I get this right, but you said you recommend a ratio of like 3 or 4 to 1 on vocals, and an attack time of like 10 to 20 milliseconds, a release of like 80 to 100 milliseconds, and then you set that threshold to where you're not reducing more than 6 dB. Did I get all that right?
That sounds really good. Yep.
Awesome. So there you go. And I also have a compression cheat sheet for live stream mix that you can download, and I'll include a link to that in the description for this video. But let's move on. Let's talk about reverb for vocals, because when you get it right, it brings so much depth. It brings so much energy to the vocal. And this is especially true on a live stream mix, because you don't have that natural reverb of the room to work with. So what have you found to be the best reverb strategy for vocals in a live stream mix?
This video is brought to you by X32 Mastery, the fastest way to master both the X32 and the M32. Get access today for you and your team at x32.church.
First of all, let me say I love reverb so much.
Same. I'm with you, man.
That's got to be my favorite thing. Like, yes. Oh man, it's just... but it's also the most like abused and sound terrible effect that's out there too, because it's so easy to make it sound bad. But yeah, please don't put dry vocals on a live stream. Whatever you do, please don't put dry vocals on a live stream. That may sound silly for people who have done this for a while, but a lot of like smaller churches with just volunteers who don't know, like there's dry vocals and they have no idea that there's even a reverb thing on their board. And the reason you don't want to put dry vocals on a live stream is because you don't hear dry voices ever in life. You're surrounded by reverb. Everything you hear is reverb. And we are wildly sensitive to how voices sound. Like our brains are built to hear voices and if they sound natural or stressed out. Like literally your brain knows emotions and they're analyzing, and you know, the mother knows if her baby's cry is distressed or happy, or like we're just built to understand how voices are supposed to sound, and they always have reverb. So if you don't have reverb on a live stream mix, your brain is going to immediately say something is wrong. Like that's just like you hear a dry voice and you're like, something doesn't sound right. And that, first of all, is distracting. And second of all, it just sounds bad. Quick side note. Have you ever seen like the people go into the like completely soundproof rooms before? Have you? Yeah, so there's these, it's in some colleges or so. There's a couple of them. They're completely soundproof. So the noise floor is like literally 0 dB, which doesn't exist in nature. And there's no reverberations. Like they're built specifically for this. And watch these people go in and taking videos, and like they'll go in, they'll close the door, and some people will get dizzy. Some people will have panic attacks. Some people will get nauseous. Like that's how unnatural not having reverb around you is it can literally make people ill. So by the way, yeah, go watch those videos. They're fun. I want to try one of those rooms so bad. That would be crazy.
Just look those up on YouTube.
Yeah, just look them up on YouTube. Just say like completely soundproof room and you'll see videos of people going in. So on that note, why you add reverb to the live stream mix is not to make it sound like there's reverb. You're making it sound like there's not reverb. You're making it sound completely natural. So my tip would be, you don't want it to sound like there's reverb on the vocal, which it does not mean don't put much on. It just means put the right kind on. So you're trying to, it's strange, but you're trying to get people to believe that there's nothing wrong with the vocal is what reverb is for. So it very much will depend on the venue and the song and the style and all that. One easy way to kind of do this is to just add the reverb, turn it up till you can hear it, and then turn it down a bit till you can't. And in general, that'll get you in the right area if the reverb's in the right sound, and that way. And then after you do that, you might think, oh, well, I just took out the reverb. If you have a way to like A/B it, like turn it off, turn it back on, turn it off, turn it back on, and you'll hear a massive, massive difference. And you'll be able to hear the reverb again. Also, your brain gets used to it quickly. So if you think there's like, you turn it down and you can't tell anymore, like just take a break for like 30 seconds, listen to it again. Your brain will forget where the reverb is and what it sounded like, and you'll either hear it or you won't. And if you can't, then that's great. And if you hear the reverb after that break, then it might be just unnatural or sounding wrong. So that's a simple way, is turn it up till you can hear it, then turn it down, take a quick break, come back, see if you can hear it. That's just kind of because we got to trick our brains with reverb because it's so natural.
Yeah, and I swear, I did not pay Nathan to say that, because that's exactly what I say when it comes to reverb. Just
is it?
Yeah, turn it up till you can hear it, and then dial it back down until it blends in.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's good
sure.
stuff. When it comes to the type of reverb, though, do you have a favorite, like a plate or a hall, or like what are you using?
I'm not sure there's a right answer. Like, so there's two kinds of reverbs. These days there's algorithmic and there's convolution. Convolution uses IRs. So in English, a convolution is imitating a real space. Like you would select something that said like Notre Dame Cathedral, and they would take an IR from Notre Dame Cathedral if it's a really expensive reverb, and then it would sound like that. Whereas algorithmic is literally just using math to pretend that it's real. So in general, algorithmic will probably be what you use if you're using like straight out of a board, or if you're using a stock reverb plugin, although there's convolution on those too. And typically those are the quickest, so good for live, and easiest to use because there's less settings and less confusing settings. So I tend to use, in live streams, I would use an algorithmic, but then I would kind of try to use like a hall or a room. I'm not a huge fan of plates on vocals. I feel like they sound unnatural, but some people love it, and that's personal preference. I tend to, usually I will start with a hall with like a, 1 to 2 second delay or decay on it, and see if that sounds right, and then adjust from there is typically where I'd go. But
I like to mix them. I like plate on vocals, so I'm one of those. Yeah,
you're one of those guys.
I'm one of those guys. I like plate at like a maybe 1 to 2 second decay time, because to me it like gives the vocal this little sparkle. You also want a pre-delay on that because you don't want all the sibilants from the S's and the T's coming through that plate too much. But my primary, the one that you'll hear more is I like the hall reverb, and I go long, like a 3 to 4 second decay time. I just love that trail at the end. So
yeah.
That plate gives it a little sparkle at the beginning, and then the hall gives it the trail at the end. That's my preference.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who do the one short and one long, and that can sound amazing for sure. Yeah, my way was kind of the quick and easy, and hey, I don't know about reverb, and I just have this one in my board. Like, start with a hall, go to 2 seconds. I think that's kind of the most least offensive, probably. And then if you're as wild and knowledgeable as Cade, you can add a second longer one on there and switch it to plate and go crazy.
Well, I really just don't think there's a right or wrong way to do reverb. It's totally a stylistic thing.
For sure. On one of my songs that I mixed, like it was a darker song, and I think my reverb on that song is like 9 seconds. It's absurd.
Wow.
Like, yeah, because it was a very like ethereal, eerie song. And then, you have a quicker song where you don't want, and then it's like you got like a half-second plate with a huge pre-delay. Like, so yeah, you're right. Reverb is musical. Like, of all your plugins, it might be the most musical, if that makes sense, which means you need to use it like an instrument almost instead of just effect.
Yeah. And when you're mixing in the room, you have to take in consideration the natural reverb of the room, because you want to complement what's going on in there already and not fight against it. And I'll just come clean. I'm a protege of Andrew Stone. I don't know if you know that guy, but he passed away a couple years ago, but he's kind of like a ringleader in the sound world. He ran sound at Church on the Move, but even before that, he ran sound at a lot of big name concerts and stuff like that. I live in the Tulsa area, so I actually got to go sit at Church on the Move and listen to how he mixed, and that guy was like all over reverb. A lot of people made fun of him for using too much reverb, but yet he's like one of the most renowned mixers out there. So it's totally stylistic. Even the guys that are mixing out there for huge concerts, some are using a little reverb, some are using a lot of reverb. It just all depends. Like, have fun with it. It's kind of like getting to be an artist, right? And painting it however you want it to look. So that's awesome. I love reverb. I'm with you, man.
Yeah, for real.
Fun stuff. I could talk about this for days, but we better go ahead and move on, unless you got something else to say.
When recording, that's the thing that I spent. I'm like, okay, Nathan, you've been messing with reverbs for 3 hours. You haven't wrote the song yet. Like, get out of there.
You know, what's fun with the live stream mix is you can also have your ambient mics in the room, which is kind of like adding your natural reverb of the room. So you can pick that up in the live stream and people can feel like they're actually there. So
I did remember one reverb tip that I was going to mention.
Go for it.
This one, I don't know if a lot of people use this or not, but one thing you can do that I think can be super helpful in clearing up your mix is to EQ after your reverb. So I do this all the time when recording. Not as much live streaming because the routing's a little more complicated. But if you have your reverb on a separate, like a bus, and you're sending your vocals to that and then back, what you can do is add the reverb, and then some reverbs have EQ on them, but if it doesn't, add an EQ after your reverb, and then EQ that reverb out of certain frequencies, and then send it back. So a lot of times, a lot of mud can come from the reverbs that is happening in like the 1 to 300 range. And a good way to picture this in your brain is like, picture an empty warehouse, picture you're playing a bass drum, and you hit that bass drum in the empty warehouse, and that reverb will start to sound muddy. It'll build up. It'll get ugly. Now switch that out. You're in the same warehouse. Picture you're playing a violin. That reverb is going to be beautiful, and it's going to sound crisp, and it's going to sound great. The bass frequencies don't bounce around as prettily, if that's a word, as the high frequencies. And if you have a bunch of low-end reverb, it's just going to be like complete mud in your mix. So if you have a lot of reverb on a lot of instruments with low ends, maybe like a guy with a voice like mine, or you have it on a guitar that's playing low, or an acoustic guitar or a piano, those all have low frequencies. It can be really helpful to put an EQ after that reverb on that bus. Literally cut everything below 300 as long as your EQ's on the bus. Don't be cutting your frequencies. But if it's on a bus, cut everything below 300 or whatever and listen back with that. And I promise it'll clear up a bunch of mud in your mix if you got that problem.
Yeah, man, that's a great tip. And for those of you using the X32, you would just put that EQ filter on the FX returns and you got it taken care of. Awesome, man. Well, let's move on. We could talk about reverb all day, but people might get tired of that. So how important do you think it is to use vocal tuning in a live stream mix?
Do it. Just do it.
We don't all have perfect pitch. I mean, what are you saying, man?
I'm confident that no one in the world has literal perfect pitch as far as singing is concerned, because that's not how the human voice works. But especially in churches, I mean, there is a stigma to it. But here's the thing: you don't have professional singers in your church, and if you do have like paid professional singers in your church, you might not be listening to this because you also have a team of professional sound engineers. So, you might think it's like cheating or something, but honestly, you're doing your singers a favor because you're not saying they're bad singers. What you're saying is that live streams are terrible for sound, which they are, because if you're playing live, you're singing live, lots of stuff covers up the inconsistencies in a vocal. Like you're not going to hear all the bad bits because there's so much going on with the room and the reverb and the people singing, all the instruments bouncing everywhere. Not going to hear all those mistakes. If you're in a recording studio, you're not going to have those mistakes because you're going to record it 12 times and then cut up the best bits and then use a bunch of effects on it and all that. A live stream is the worst of both of those. So you can hear everything because it's recorded, but it's live. So there's no redos, there's no takes, people can't even hear themselves on stage maybe. So you're literally getting the worst of both worlds as far as singing is concerned. And in general, your singers will sound the worst on a live stream than they will in any other situation. So by using tuning, you're not saying they're bad. You're saying you're good. And this live stream makes you sound bad because that's just the nature of it. So use tuning to help your poor singers out and yourself if you're the singer, because live streams are very mean to vocals, very mean to vocals.
It's true. I wonder how many vocals never listen to the live stream replay because they're like, I want to hear myself.
Because one of the churches I do, they don't have a ability to do tuning on theirs, and I don't even listen to it. I'm like, I hope I don't sound like that. That's terrible.
I sounded great in the room.
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah. So what vocal tuning plugin do you use?
For live situations, for recording, I use Melodyne, but you can't use that for live because that's cut and paste kind of thing. I think probably the best is still Autotune and Terry's Autotune, but Waves Tune is fine. And I don't think in a live stream situation that you're going to notice that much of a difference between like Terry's, which is like $300, and Waves Tune, which is usually like $50 or something. So I would go with Wave Tunes unless you got a huge budget and you're very professional mix on your live stream. Then maybe Antares might be worth the extra money, but yeah, Waves Tune is fine. I think that's probably what most people use too.
Awesome. What are the settings we need to be paying attention to on that tuning plugin?
All these tuning plugins have so much different settings. Like it's not like compressing and reverb where it's all pretty standard. I was looking at Antares and I don't know what they name their things. There's like humanization and pitch modulate, like and then this other one has a completely different terms. Like they're all different. And whatever yours is called, in general, you want to pay attention to the key that's set, the speed of how it comes in, and possibly the range if it has that. So for key, usually you can select a key. I would not select a key. I would leave it on chromatic, because most songs they won't always have accidentals, but they might have like an in-between note that is technically an accidental, and you don't want to get rid of that by setting the key, So I would go with chromatic. That way it just goes to the nearest whatever note. And then you want a pretty high time on it so that it's not T-pained, because what T-pain is they crank the time to like 0 and they crank the correction to 100 and they select a key like D and then it immediately puts those notes in that key, and that's why you get a robot. So leave chromatic and then put the time up so that it takes just a bit to correct the note so it doesn't sound like a robot. That'll help it kind of blend in and not sound fake. And then if it has a correction knob, that one you kind of just have to go as high as you can without it sounding unnatural. And that's what you want for the amount of correction. So I assume you're going for natural correction. If you're going for T-Pain worship, then do whatever you want. But for natural, like vocal correction, you want a pretty high time. I don't know, like 80, 100 milliseconds in that area probably. And then correction as high as you can get it before it sounds unnatural.
Good. Awesome. It seems complicated, but it actually sounds really simple when you explain it. So good job, man.
Thank you.
Well, when it comes to vocal mixing, I tend to keep it simple and focus on the big three, EQ, compression, and reverb. But there's also some other things that you can do to take vocals to the next level in a live stream mix. So why don't you tell us a bit about your favorites before we finish up here?
Mixing sound seems complicated, but it doesn't have to be. Get access to our stress-free training to help you create great sound at church by visiting churchsoundmadesimple.com.
95% is EQ, compression, and reverb, and that's probably a conservative estimate. Like, get those three, and honestly, you don't need anything else. Like, you really don't need anything else at all. Master those three, and you'll have a great vocal mix. Some other things, most of the other things are really like specific problem solvers that I would use, or just additional effects. I'm not going to talk about additional effects because if you want a distorted vocal, you know to add a distortion. I don't need to tell you that. But some problem solvers that might come into play is like a de-esser, which is just, it's basically a compressor of a high frequency where the sibilance is. So like it might compress the 5K when it comes in, but nothing else. It's in a way like a very specific multi-band compressor is what it is. And that's just to get rid of very harsh sibilance, which I actually have a problem with. So I had a lot of de-essing on my album because I do this a lot. I don't know why, but that's what it sounds like when I'm singing. You're going to only hear that. So that's what de-esser is. It gets to that that where it gets really ugly. You might need that. You might not on a live stream. Only use it if you need it. It can also cause delay issues because some of them, since they're multi-band compressors, technically use a lot of processing power. So be careful that it doesn't delay your vocals. Another one's saturation. Some people love saturation. I'm not a big saturation head, if that's a word. I'm coining it right now, saturation heads. Saturation is just a fancy word for distortion that you can't really hear. And what it does is, like all distortions, it introduces a bunch of extra energy and harmonics and frequencies into your sound. But the point of saturation, opposed to distortion, is that it's low enough that you can't really tell. And in a recording studio situation, it might have some good uses. In a live stream, it's probably too broad of a mix for that to matter, if that makes sense. The only time I might say to use it in a live stream is if, on vocals, is if you're tried everything and you really can't get that lead vocal to cut through the mix. You could try to throw some saturation on there. It might help it cut through, might make it distorted, so you have to be careful. But that is one area it could maybe help, is to help the lead vocal cut through. And then finally, another one that I see that's common is delay. And a lot of people add delay to vocals. And what you're doing with delay on vocals is you're just adding really, really long reverb, basically. Reverb is a kind of delay, but in this case, delay is a kind of reverb. So you're just trying to get another reverb effect. And if you know what you're doing with delay, it can sound really good and natural, but only use delay as a reverb if you know what you're doing. I went to a church and they had a delay on the vocal, and while they were playing, I couldn't tell, and it sounded great. But then like the band stopped and it got quiet, and they had this like fourth note ping pong delay on, and all of a sudden it's like a Fish concert because the band slowed down, and there's like the lead singer's like echoing all over the place because they have this like fourth note delay on it. So it can sound great, and it's like you use like fourth note and eighth note delays, and you're replicating like sound bouncing off walls, like a really big reverb. And it can add a lot of lushness because it basically adds another voice in there that you can't tell is there. But again, if you don't control it like well, and you don't watch it, and like your band slows down, it gets to a quiet part, you might end up with like a weird Fish concert echoey delay thing going on when you don't want it. So use delay if you really want to play with it, and be careful and knob watch the whole time, and you like the sound of it, go for it. But if you want to set it and forget it and you don't want to mess with that, then be careful with delay, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to stay away from delay and tell my sound techs at our church not to use it because you have to babysit it. If you don't babysit it, you're going to have some funny things going on at the end of your song.
Yes, you are.
But yeah, it does sound really cool whenever you know what you're doing and you're babysitting it. And that's some of the coolest moments in a mix. It's like you hear that delay because it's like right at the right time and they had it programmed just right. You're like, wow, that was awesome. Mm-hmm. But I don't tend to get to be that awesome because, at church, there's so many other things you got to think of other than babysitting the delay. So,
yeah. And like when I'm recording in the studio, I have reverb and delay on every track, but I have the delay automated so that when the song cuts out, so does the delay. So it's not weird. You can't really automate your live stream audio the way you can a recording studio. So you got to literally knob watch.
Yep. All right, man. Well, if you want to hear Nathan's master mixing skills on a recording, you have to go listen to his album. So, man, tell us a little more about that album and how we can hear it. Tell us a little more about that album and how we can hear it.
It's called Hymns of the Father. It's the first part of a 3-part series in the Trinity Project. First one's the Father. I bet you can guess the other two, Spirit and Son. I don't know why I said that. Usually Son and Spirit. But you can find it on all the places you find music, Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube and all those places, or www.reawakenhymns.com. You can also go there, and then you can also get a devotional and an audiobook and backing tracks and all the worship resources if you want to use those in your church, because the point of me making this stuff is not just so I get to make music. That's just a great benefit of it. But I'm trying to equip the church with this stuff. Like, I know a lot of churches want to play hymns, and sometimes you can't find the right version that fits with your, you play an elevation song and then you pull out the organ. That doesn't work so much. So with this album in particular, I tried to make them very modern sounding, like they would fit right next to any Australian mega church song that you happen to be playing in your set. So that's what this is for. It's really, I'm just trying to provide these hymns to fit in the context of the modern churches so we don't lose them because they're awesome. So yeah. You can get on my website or listen to it wherever, Spotify. Just search Hymns of the Father or Reawaken Hymns, and you'll find it.
That's awesome, man. My hat's off to you because that was a big project that I guess you're still in the middle of. And I think a lot of churches are going to benefit from this. So I just pray, man, that your album gets out to everybody who needs it, that it becomes really well known so that churches have those resources available. Because how cool that you can get the backing tracks and the devotionals and everything. Because I can just see worship teams using those devotionals to, have that together so they know what they're singing about. And it just brings more purpose to what they're doing. Because as a worship team, sometimes you show up, you just go through what it takes to put the song together and you don't really think about what you're singing. I can just see your devotionals really helping that. So, dude, great job. Thank you.
Thank you. That would be great. That'd be great.
Yeah, man.
That's what I'm going for.
That's awesome, man. Well, thanks for your time today. It was great. Y'all go check out his album.